Welcome to the Pan Am Podcast, brought to you by the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York. This podcast and our museum are dedicated to celebrating the legacy of the world's most iconic airline, Pan American World Airways. My name is Tom Betty, and I'm the host of this program. Thank you for joining us. This program is sponsored by the generous support of Mr. Adam Aaron, the CEO of AMC Entertainment Holdings Incorporated. The Pan Am Museum Foundation is a nonprofit organization. Please visit our website for more information at thepanammuseum.org. Again, our website is thepanammuseum.org. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. If you are using Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving a review. It will help others discover this program. If you're not familiar with Pan Am, welcome. We are honored to have you here, and for you to learn about what we're all about. If you already know of Pan Am, worked for or flown on the airline, or just love our history, it's good to be with you again. So with that, let's get this episode in the air, so to speak. Welcome aboard your Pan American Jet Clipper. In this episode, we are joined by Barbara Sharfstein, a veteran Pan Am flight attendant. Barbara joined Pan Am in 1951, and after 35 years of service with the airline as a flight attendant, purser, check purser, and 747 in-flight director, she was transferred to United Airlines in 1986 when the Pacific Division was sold. She then worked for United for another 6 years before retiring in 1992. When first hired, Barbara traveled on board several groundbreaking and innovative aircraft: the Convair CV-240, the Lockheed Constellation, the DC-4, and most memorably, the Boeing 777 Stratocruiser. Barbara flew to numerous international destinations and was based in many of Pan Am's divisions throughout her career, but she most fondly remembers working the fabled round-the-world flights, Clipper 001 and Clipper 002. During her aviation career flying around the world working for the airlines, Barbara also found great success in San Francisco real estate when she was not on duty in the air. Her crowning achievement was the development of a 1-acre parcel of land in the Twin Peaks neighborhood of San Francisco into a division of 20 condos. Many say it has one of the best views of the city. Today, Barbara volunteers at the San Francisco International Airport Aviation Museum. As a volunteer, she enjoys sharing her stories and lending her time ever since the International Terminal was rebuilt in 2000. Additionally, she served as the editor of World Wings International San Francisco chapter newsletter, having excelled in that position for the past 25 years. Barbara currently resides in San Francisco. Thank you for coming on the Pan Am Podcast, Barbara.
Oh, you're very welcome.
It's lovely to be talking to you.
Thank you.
So you were a flight attendant. You were hired by Pan Am in 1951. Why did you want to become a flight attendant?
I had not thought about that. I was out of college and I was working I had been to, one part of my college was a summer semester living with a Mexican family. It was a branch of the University of Mexico in Saltillo, Coahuila, Mexico. And I lived with a wonderful Mexican family and who did not speak English. So my Spanish was very good. And I was back home now out of school, out of my regular college at home, and working helping them do translations. And because my Spanish was pretty good, which was thanks to the fabulous people I was living with and the summer school I was at. It was a 3-month school called Escuela de Verano Interamericano. That was the name of the school down there I was at. I went with no expectations of being hired. I thought you had to look like a movie star, but friend of mine and I who had been with me at the same school, and she was also was down in Mexico with me. So she had talked me into going, and I did not tell my parents what I was going for. I told them I was going on a vacation. In fact, we took a train down there, and I got down, and they heard our Spanish, and we were both hired in about 10 minutes. So that's all I can tell you about being hired. But then we had to have a physical, and then we went back home and broke the news to family and to my boss, Sarah. He said I could come back if I wanted to work, but I didn't. I said, no, I think I'm going to like this job. And that's how it started.
What did your family say when you
They
came
were
home?
shocked. In my little world, actually, then they had moved to Wilmette. They had moved to Wilmette, Illinois. I was growing up in Chicago, but they were there in Illinois. Where I was, nobody did that. You don't leave home when you're not married. You know, that's how it was. They were shocked, but they were very understanding, and I have to say they were wonderful parents, and they did not object. They just did not object. I just said, listen, I was 21. I was ready to go out into the world. And they said, well, okay. That's how it was. They were very supportive of me.
And why did you choose Pan Am over some of the other airlines?
I never thought about even being a flight attendant. Actually, when I was hired, we're called stewardesses, and I always loved that term. I didn't even like flight attendant when I first heard it. Now I'm more used to it after it was changed, but I never thought about it of any airline. I didn't even know where Pan Am flew at the time. From Chicago, I didn't even know. I thought they went to Havana. That's all I knew. But I didn't even think about any other airline because nobody said, let's go and try and get hired by another airline.
So 1951, you get hired by Pan American. Walk us through what happened next.
I had several very interesting, one very sad one. Another gal that was also in school with us down there, she was at a different college, university, but, back in the Chicago area. But she came down 3 months after my friend and I were hired, and we were living in a house with 5 of us, 5 flighted, with 3 bedrooms, and we played musical beds just because we were all out flying somewhere. We never were in the same. We didn't even worry about sheets at that age, changing anything. We were just very young ladies starting out in our lives. And my friend came down and stayed with us, and 3 months after she came, she was on a Stratocruiser flight from, I think it was Rio, going nonstop to Miami or New York. I can't remember, but unfortunately that airplane crashed in the Brazilian jungle and she was killed. So this was a horrible experience for me. I wasn't even 22 yet when this, I was, yes, it was in 1952. That's right. It was just past, must have been April or May.
For our listeners, Barbara is discussing Pan Am Flight 202, a Boeing 377 Stratocruiser named Clipper New Hope that crashed in the Amazon basin on April 29, 1952. The accident happened shortly after departure from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, en route to the first scheduled stop in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago. The final destination of this flight was New York. All 50 people on board were killed, 41 passengers and 9 crew members, in what was the deadliest ever accident involving the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser. The investigation took place under exceptionally difficult conditions in the jungle, and the exact cause of the crash was never established. However, it was theorized, based on the examination of the wreckage, that the number 2 engine had separated in flight after propeller blade failure and debris likely penetrated the fuselage, causing a catastrophic in-flight breakup.
It was a terrible crash. And that was a really hideous experience. My parents came down. They knew her parent. I mean, we were all friends. It was just a horrible experience. But then I put that in a book because one of our vice presidents, ex-vice presidents of Pan Am, who's written a book, he wrote a book about experience. I think it's called, what is it called? It's called.
Yes, the book is titled Pan American World Airways, Aviation History Through the Words of Its People by James Patrick Baldwin, Jeff Krindler, and Leslie Giles. To our listeners, there's a link in the episode description to purchase this book. So Jeff Krindler, former Pan Am Vice President of Corporate Communication, called you up and
he asked me to write that story, plus, and then he knew this other wonderful story that happened that same year, so I did that one as well. But it was interesting because at that time, in the early 50s, I was on a flight where we ended up in Belém, Brazil. That was the closest point to where the crash site was. This vice president was on board. Humphrey Toomey was his name, one of the vice presidents at that time. And he told my purser, I was the stewardess, my purser and I, what he was going to do, that there was going to be a meeting of the search committee that were going in to search the jungle. They were jungle experts from all over the Americas, South America, North America. And they were going to go on a trek to find the airplane. They had to find what happened to this airplane. They had spotted it the day I left on that trip. And that trip was going all the way down to Buenos Aires, but it was on a DC-4. Pan Am had two flights that went that far, and two different aircraft that went that far. One was the Stratocruiser. The other was the DC-4, which made every stop imaginable. And so, but there was only a couple of weeks, so that's why I've spent quite a bit of time in Belém, Brazil, going down, and on the DC-4. So he said there was going to be a meeting of the crew that they're putting together, and my purser, Norm Reynolds was his name. He said, after Mr. Toomey sat back down in his seat, he said, I'm going to crash that meeting and I'm going on that trek. I said, what can you do? He said, well, I can cook and I can camp and they're going to need me. By gosh, he just went and talked his way right onto that thing. When I went back to a day or two later to get on the airplane, I hadn't seen him, Norm, the whole time. He said, where is the other flight attendant? I said, I don't know. And then we realized I was going to run this flight by myself. But Mr. Toomey said, do you need some help? I said, yes. I always thought all these vice presidents were billionaires, so I'm sure he never carried a tray, but he measured right up and helped me. And I whispered, oh, I think this is too much for you. You might want to take it. Anyway, he measured up and he did a great job and helped me get through that trip, which was not easy considering what was happening with my wonderful Pat Monahan, who was anyway. But that was that.
And my condolences about your friend.
Oh, we were both the same age. We were 22. I mean, it was just terrible. But anyway.
Did you ever have doubts about the profession that you were in after your friend was killed in this?
By the time this happened, I couldn't even think about anything for a little bit, but I decided I liked the job. I was going to stick it out. My parents came down to see how I was doing, and we all had to pack up Pat's things and get it back to her place. I thought about it, but I decided I liked the job so much I was going to continue doing it. I was never afraid on the airplane, ever. I can tell you, I was never felt like I was going to crash. But no, I just stuck with it. But later that year, that same year, before I was involuntarily transferred to New York Latin American Division, about a year after I started. But in 1952, which is after about April or May or something, I had a flight on the Stratocruiser. That was the same airplane that I loved so much, that the same kind of an airplane that was built on. And I was handling the passengers in the lower lounge. That airplane had bunks where passengers would climb up a little ladder we'd wheel down the aisle. They'd get up on their bunks and go to bed. And then the other passengers could go downstairs. There was like a downstairs and the bunks up above where the baggage goes now. And I was handling the lounge down below. And there's Louis Armstrong with about 4 of his bags down there. And they're talking to a few other passengers that were there. Some of the ones upstairs had already gone into their bunks. Others were in their seats that didn't have bunks, that were, stretching out a little bit. And his band guy, and they were all talking. They were kidding a little bit, but they were saying, "Oh, we wish we had our instruments." Well, down in the lounge, right next to the bar, there was a door into the baggage area. And there was a couple of extra liquor kits there we could get to if we needed. But there was also this rope fence with a clasp, and you could see the bags through the rope. And the guy, I said, well, just a minute, take a look at this. So I opened the door. Here, I'm just passing my 6 months probation. I mean, I think I could have been fired for what I did, but I had them look through this mesh curtain. I said, "Do you see anything that looks like your instruments?" "Oh my God, yes," they said they saw something. And they found there's something. So pretty soon, Louis is singing and they're playing, and just passengers are hearing this music, and they're coming down the stairs. And little by little, pretty soon, it's a circular seating area. Then there's a step to get into that seating area. So now they're in all the seats are taken. Now all the step up to the seats are taken. Now all the steps of the stairway is taken, and people are on the floor there. I mean, it was ridiculous. But I'm squished up against the wall with passengers passing. I helped make a drink, and they're helping me make a drink, and they're passing them now to the other passengers. Everybody's working practically down there. And meanwhile, the captain was
great.
asking the purser, was something going on? He could tell some movement from the cockpit. And later he told me I could have been in a lot of trouble if the lounge hadn't been in the middle of the fuselage, because of the weight and balance of the airplane. But everybody, they got all kinds of mail, I think, about it, that everybody loved it so much that they'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. It was one of those.
Yeah, the concert in the sky with Louis Armstrong.
It was just amazing. It was an amazing adventure, yes.
Before we go on, let's explore for a moment the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, which Pan Am was the launch customer and was in service with the airline from 1949 to 1961. For most of this time, this aircraft was the largest commercial aircraft in flight. The design was based on the wartime Boeing C-97 Stratofreighter military transport, itself a derivative of the B-29 Super Fortress. The Stratocruiser had many innovative features, including 2 passenger decks and a pressurized cabin. It could carry up to 100 passengers on the main deck, plus 14 in the lower deck lounge. Typical seating was for 63 or 84 passengers, or 28 berthed and 5 seated passengers. The Pan Am Museum outside of New York City has a permanent exhibit dedicated to the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser. Let's take a quick listen to a 1950 Pan Am promotional film on the Stratocruiser.
throughout the trip, you'll find little touches that make you feel more like a special guest than a passenger. At dinner time, a 7-course meal is served from the ship's galley, the largest and most efficient flying kitchen in the world. Your dinner may be turned out with production line efficiency, but it's a meal that any housewife would be proud to serve. And you couldn't be more comfortable in your own dining room. With service like this, a trip by Pan American Clipper is something more than the shortest distance between 2 points. It's more than the fastest, safest way to travel. It's a pleasure in itself. If you should feel like turning in early after dinner, you'll find none of the old problems. Your reclining chair is like a foam rubber cloud, and your neighbor's reading light is adjusted so as not to disturb your rest. The evening wears on. The bridge game has averaged over 300 miles to a rubber. And now the losers suggest that they get up and stretch their legs for a minute. You see, the Clipper passenger isn't tied to his seat. There's plenty of room to move around. And for a complete change of view, you can even go downstairs. Flying 5 miles above the earth, you go 1 flight down to the Clipper's lower deck lounge. Here, in a quiet, sociable atmosphere, you can take a breathing space in your trip and get to know your fellow passengers a little more informally. If you're traveling on business, you welcome the relaxation that you find here. And if you're on a holiday, a luxury like this makes the plane flight part of your vacation. You may be ending the evening with a nightcap, while above decks your berth is being made up for you. At night, many of the Clipper seats convert into wide, comfortable sleepers, and a really spacious dressing room helps you get ready for bed.
So, Barbara, getting back to your story, where did you go after 1952?
I went to New York then, and I flew for about 3 years out of New York. And then I transferred because I thought I'm going to go to see Asia, which I transferred to San Francisco. And I did, and I spent the rest of my career with Pan Am and with United too in San Francisco, which I loved living there. I told everybody that I'm glad I wasn't hired there. I might never have left. That's how much I liked San Francisco, actually. And so that's about when I started. And I can tell you the jobs I had while I was with Pan Am. As I say, I started as a stewardess, and within a year I was a purser, which means you're pretty much in charge of the documentation. In the early days, there was no money involved because everything was free to passengers. They didn't start charging until much later. But it was a job. We had trips that were very long. We had that DC-4 trip down to Buenos Aires, making all the stops, was a 23-day trip. I'd come back from that and I'd say, now when do I do this again? I thought that was such a neat experience, But it was it just seemed like I was in another world. It was such a wonderful job. But when I got to San Francisco, my jobs started out as a stewardess, then a purser. Then they asked me to be a check purser, was to check out new pursers, because they really didn't have a training class, but they would have you explain what they do or a little bit, and then you'd take them out on trips and make sure that they understood. It got more complicated when money started being involved, because you were selling headsets for the movies when the movies came. And then later on, we started selling drinks in the economy section. So we'd be having that be in charge. In fact, towards the end of my flying with Pan Am, we had a bar car. We were selling duty free, and but this is before they were Pan Am. United started using credit cards much before Pan Am did, but Pan Am was still using cash for the duty free, and I would ending up in Narita after a trip. I could have $10,000 in my purser kit.
Oh, wow.
And I would be walking over there behind the ticket counters. I'd go back to an office to drop off the money, and I'd be thinking, gosh, somebody could, if they knew what I was carrying, I could be in trouble. I was thinking of that a lot of times. But it was, anyway, I was then, when the 747s came, in fact, that was then also at that time, I became a flight director, an in-flight director, is what they call us, an in-flight director. And that's because it was a brand new airplane. That was in 70, I think it was, when they first came. So they had that position. So those are my jobs. And then I went back to purser after they didn't need that anymore because the pursers were all checked out and knew what to do. So that's what we did. And
which airplanes did you fly on?
Oh, I'll tell you what airplanes. When I started in Miami, I had 4 airplanes that I was checked out on. By the way, every airplane we're checked out on the emergency equipment and what to do if there's an emergency. And yet we had tests for a while it was every 6 months, and then it became every year. I think we changed it to that. And the first airplanes I flew on were the Convair. It was a 2-engine airplane that went to Havana and back, and maybe a couple of the islands, the Caribbean. Then there was the Constellation, which we call the Constellation, and of course the Boeing and the DC-4. Those were the 4. Later on in the 60s, they had and then later, even in the 50s, we had started getting DC-6s, DC-7s, and we got jets in 60. The jets in 60, and then we had another form of jets. My memory gets a little hazy there, but I know. And then we had the A320s, which is the Airbus. We were flying those. And we had the 737, every airplane, and then the 747s. There was a 747 something at the very end that also enhanced 747 that I flew on as well. But I flew on every aircraft every type of aircraft that Pan Am had. And then at the end, the L-1011. That was my last flight with Pan Am, was on the L-1011 Lockheed airplane, yes.
I'm guessing the Stratocruiser was your favorite plane. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. I always tell people that even though I had that terrible experience with my roommate, that airplane was my all-time favorite airplane to work on. It was so wonderful. The beginning, it was all first class. And it was, at that age, the rich and famous did not have their corporate jets. They flew with us, and TWA as well. They flew with us. And we were practically the only, international airline. We had no domestic flights at all at that time. And so it was later they changed it, and they had towards the end, but they had that airplane was a wonderful airplane.
Can you help us imagine it? Can you describe the meal service and what it looked like?
Oh, Pan Am from the first, when I was hired in 1951, we had a 6-week training course, and we were served the meals that they serve in first class and shown how to do it. The meal service, it was, nobody has ever, I can't even on the new ones that come out of Arabia, I don't know anyone that can do it. On the cart, we would have caviar and smoked salmon and prosciutto and melon and quail legs. I mean, on the cart. I mean, I had one experience with a gentleman traveling without his wife, but with his 2 sons. I think they were 8 and 10 or something. And one is sitting with him, the other is sitting behind him with another passenger. And as I'm coming down the aisle, the kids are saying yuck when they see the caviar. And his father's trying to tell them to try it. Don't just say yuck, just try it. Later, he came back to the galley and said, I have to apologize for my kids. He says, but I want them to someday want to eat those things, to afford to eat those things. That's what he said. And I thought that was such a fun experience with, see how kids would react to something. But our service was gorgeous. And our stewards that came from with the early flying I had, that came from the flying boats. A lot of them, most of them were European. A number of them were European, and they would do that cart so beautifully. I would love watching them, and I'd want to do it like they did it. And it was just wonderful to see how they did that. And I did have one, in fact, I have a menu that I just found it. Going through, how you gather papers, and I was under papers that I'd stacked on top of it. It was a menu from the 1960s. It doesn't have the actual date on it, but it was different from any other menu Pan Am I've ever seen on Pan Am, and I don't know if they did it on other Thanksgivings, but it was printed up like Sanskrit or whatever, or parchment, in a rolled up scroll with a ribbon on it. And it told a story of the first Thanksgiving, which is, kind of a made up story, but it was a very beautiful story with yeas and with whatever. And they told me the day before the flight that I was going to be, we served Chateaubriand and filet mignon and rack of lamb and pork. We served everything on the cart that we carved with a carving knife. Right from the first day I ever started with Pan Am, but never a turkey. And as I say, I had certainly never carved a turkey. I was having nightmares about it the day before. And fortunately, a passenger I think he saw my hands shaking with the knife and fork, ready to try to carve this. I thought it was going to fly off the cart and land in somebody's lap, but he said he hadn't missed a Thanksgiving with his family in years, and said, "Can I do that?" I said, "Yes." So I got on the other end of the cart, and he went through. He was obviously a wonderful extrovert and fabulous man, and talking to everybody. It was the most delightful experience. It was.
And that picture, it's a very famous picture. If you Google Thanksgiving Pan Am, there's this gentleman that has this entire turkey in front of him, and he's carving it. And I wonder if this is the same flight.
Oh, I think where it was. I can only tell you that what I plan to do, I'll tell you that what I do now is I have a job, a volunteer job at the SFO Aviation Museum. So I'm a volunteer there, docent, and I've given them any bit of paraphernalia I have, but I found the menu of that flight buried under a bunch of papers. I've got it right now stretched out on a very heavy book to get the creases out. Unfortunately, I think I almost ruined the scroll, but it's not ruined. But I'm going to give it to the museum so they'll have it whenever they want to use it. But that is so interesting. I never saw anything like that on a film. Never.
Yeah, I'll email it to you.
Well, it could be, because he was so wonderful. He walked right through talking to everybody, and I got on the other end to get up the side dishes, which were they tried to do it as authentically as they thought it would be at that age, in 1620 or whenever that date was.
We're going to take a quick break with a Pan Am commercial from 1982.
In 1935, only one airline, Pan Am, stood poised on the edge of America, ready to challenge the Pacific.
Experience.
And today, the mighty clippers of Pan Am rise majestically from 6 continents for the far corners of the world. Only Pan Am has the experience and the people to help you in 39 countries around the world.
Experience is 50 years of flying. Yes, we've been there before. Fly with the people who know. You can't beat the experience.
Where will we fly to next? Well, we've been thinking.
You can't beat the experience.
Welcome back to our interview with Pan Am flight attendant Barbara Sharfstein. So I also wanted to ask you about any memorable experiences flying for Pan Am or United that you'd like to share with us.
Well, I'll just tell you, flying with United, they were really very nice to me. I thought they were very nice to me and to my friends that went with us. It was very hard leaving Pan American because they were like part of my family. I can't tell you the affection that I felt for Pan Am, but I think we are still stay very connected, all of us, from every department. But our flight attendants, we have World Wings, which is our group. The pilots have their Clipper Pioneers, which is their group. Now they invite everybody to their things. We can't invite everybody to our conventions because we have there are so many more of us than of them. but we still have quite a large number of, I think a couple thousand of us from all over the world, because we have people from all places in Europe and Asia. We've had conventions from every place in Europe and in Asia, Tokyo and Bangkok, Hong Kong, every place. So we raise a lot of money for charity. What we do, well, I can tell you that now, I don't know, but it's not the right time to tell you, but
No, please do.
We raise money. Our main charity, our international charity, is now Doctors Without Borders. But we've changed those. We had a deaf charity for one part, and actually the last charity we had was CARE, which focused on third world women, focusing on lending them money so they could go into business and get better lives. That's what we were doing for a number of years. Before that, deaf group. We've had different international charities that help people all over the world. But every chapter has its own charities, local charities. Ours right now are the homeless women and children, and that's one of them in San Jose. And then we have the hospice on the peninsula, and we have the animals, ASPCA. And so we get together a lot. And we're the only airline that has a group that stayed together for so long. Nobody can understand it. There was an article written in a magazine that wondered how a company that has been gone for so many years can still have the love and reverence for their employees. If they said if corporate America could figure it out, they'd just put it together and just bottle it and sell it or something. I think that was in a magazine, because no other company goes out of business. A bank goes bankrupt, goes out of business, which was like the death of a relative also, when it went out. Even after I was with United, when it went out, it was just terrible. But anyway, with United, I had very good trips with United, and I have to say they were very nice to me. It was very interesting getting into a different airline that was so different from us. But it's the same. There are wonderful people and a few not so wonderful, just like any other airline or any other company. So it was just great.
Did you have a favorite place that you like to go visit on trips?
Everybody asks me that. What was your favorite city? Where was your favorite place? But I can't tell you because every place that we went had something different. I loved history in London. I loved Paris. I mean, for Paris. And I loved Hong Kong for shopping. I'm sick about what's happening in Hong Kong now after being there so many times. The beauty of going back and forth was if we didn't do something one time we're there, we do it the next time. We got to see everything and do everything in these places. I fell in love. I became, in the Middle East, I absolutely fell in love with the kilns and the meditation squares, and I became a textile freak. That's what they would call me, a textile freak. In Japan, I turned into a bonsai freak. I learned how to make them, and I was doing them for a while for everybody. And I was having them shown at a museum for their when they would have dignitaries coming in at the Asian. So I mean, I did a lot of things. It was flying. I loved where I went, but I have to tell you now, San Francisco is my favorite city in the world, and I'm so happy just to live here.
And when did you move to San Francisco?
It was about 55, 56, 1956, or 55, I think it was. And stayed here ever since. And I was renting for a long time and then flying. And I'd say for the next 10 years, I was just flying a lot and having a wonderful life, a very wonderful social life. And then I started doing something. But I had a week, I would have long trips and have hours that I used, and then I'd have a week off sometimes, 5 days, 6 days off in between flights, because these flights were long. And decided I wanted to do something besides what I was doing. I felt like I wanted to be more productive in a business-like way. So a friend, I don't know if you want me to get into this part of my life.
Sure, please.
So a friend of mine and I decided, I thought, at that time, this was in the early 70s when inflation was rampant. It was getting more and more there. And I thought, I'm going to buy a house now. And I was looking around, and you could buy a house for $50,000, $60,000, and with a little down payment, I could have done that. And then I thought, no, somebody said something that I shouldn't be renting. I'd never owned my own house, ever, because I was always felt like I was going to move somewhere, because I moved already several times from Miami to New York San Francisco. They said, no, you shouldn't be renting anymore. So I said, okay. And I put a down payment, or I didn't even put it, but I put a bid in on a house, and I got it for, I think, under $50,000, a 3-bedroom house in Miraloma Park, which is in San Francisco. And I ran into a friend on the neighbor and another fellow flight attendant who I'd flown with a number of times and socialized with, and who I knew fairly well, and told her what I had done. And she said, do you want a partner? I told her what I was planning to do. I said, well, do you want to see the house first? And she said, not necessary. She just wanted to. She had the same urge to do something like that, but they call it flipping now. We decided to do a renovation. We called it a renovation at that time. And whatever it was, we made every mistake you could make. But I tell my nieces and nephews, now grandnieces and nephews, I always tell them to dream your dream, but don't quit your day job. Well, flying was kind of like my day job at that time, although I still loved it as my main job, as a matter of fact. And the first house, we did everything wrong, and we called it, because we made it too beautiful for where it was, and hired workers that weren't licensed or something, and tried to sell it by ourselves. If we'd found somebody to buy it, we wouldn't have known what to do. So now we get into the next. Well, we decided it was an aesthetic success. It was definitely not a financial success. But then we continued on, never mind, wasn't successful the first time. And then we were very successful for a few more houses. And then we bought this lot in the city, right near where I lived. I lived by myself at that time. And she did too, another apartment in the building. And we ended up buying a lot that was for sale, very close to where we lived, and happened to be right under the lookout point of where the Suto Tower is in San Francisco, the city. And we bought it, went through 11 hearings with a neighborhood organization who had been successful against 5 other people with bids trying to buy it. We were successful in having our bid accepted, which was a very low bid because of, and nobody would, and the interest rates at that time were 21% prime, and
wow,
and it was prime plus 2 points for construction loans. So nobody was building, but we got the land. We went through 2.5 years of city planning commission, and we did it because I think we got it because it was, as my father once said to me, because the smartest people he knew were the ones who knew they didn't know everything. Didn't try to say they know anybody, that they knew something they didn't know. And he was right, because while we're asking them what do we do next, other people are telling them what they're going to do. The professionals, so they helped write our presentations. I won't say they call us developers, but we were actually we took it through the building permit stage, 11 hearings in front of the Planning Commission, and did our own presentations. But I have to admit, the planning department, who are anxious for the revenue from new housing, they want you to win, but they have to be very fair to everybody. And we ended up as a joint venture partners is what we did, because we certainly didn't have millions of dollars to build these things, but we had everybody in the city wanted to be our joint venture partner, and we picked a couple of fabulous guys who were so honorable and wonderful, and we ended up, we didn't get an attorney. We couldn't afford an attorney even at that time. that's why we didn't have one helping us, and we were told we were the only ones to develop, to get these off the ground without an attorney handling the thing. So, but we did hire one to make the contract with the joint venture partners, and they got a wonderful deal. And the best part of that was that our attorney that we hired, after it was half built, he called us and said that, because at first they wanted to give us all money. We were fainting on the floor when they told us what they wanted to pay us, but our attorney told us if we accepted, he would quit. So later he called us and said that he's still our attorney, but the guys that were our partners wanted to hire him for another project that they were doing, because they were very happy the way it turned out too, because they didn't have to put up a lot of money. See, we did it in a different way. They would owe us the money that they were offered us for this, and we didn't get it until after it was finished, and we got everything back, all our money back, a little extra furniture money, and each of us a unit here, and with the best view in San Francisco, I think. It's just
Nice.
So that's what happened to me. But anyway, my experience with Pan Am was fabulous, and I feel like I'm a very fortunate person, and I've had a wonderful life. And that's when people say, "What's the best thing you ever did?" And I think being hired by Pan Am was really the best. But there were so many things. I just remember so many different incidences. We had a few close calls. I had the same problem that what they found out from that crashed Stratocruiser was it turned out to be a runaway, what they call a runaway propeller. And I was on a flight on that airplane, and we found we were having the same problem. So it was the propeller, a runaway propeller is a propeller that starts wavering instead of just going around. It's going back. It's slower, but it's still going around a lot, but it's going back and forth too. So we evacuated everybody from the window where it would hit, because that's what they expected. That's what they think happened to that airplane in the Brazilian jungle. And we evacuated them, and then we were, worried that it was, but they depressurized and went down, got themselves below the place where it would depressurize. And then we landed in Montevideo. We were going on that airplane from Buenos Aires. That was going to go to Miami, or to Rio. I think it was going to go to Rio and then on to Miami or New York. But we landed, and the mechanic, I'm sure he was exaggerating, but he said that the propeller practically came off in his hands, so it could have come off. And our biggest fear it would definitely hit the fuselage. Oh, I have another story with passengers too. We did the Vietnam War. During the Vietnam War, we went the troop transports, and we also flew the R&Rs. And then we did the baby lift. We brought back a lot of the babies, from the Amerasian children that were left behind. And at the beginning, we had a whole lot of babies in there, and with a lot of people helping from their diplomat wives and all kinds of whoever they could get to just help with the kids, babies. Some just because they were just an airplane full of babies, some of them, but they were scattering them around other flights as they got to Manila and Guam. They would always go through from Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City, to Manila. Then they'd separate them into other airplanes it was another crew that would take them further, or they would take them as far as Guam and then get some more, separate them some more, so you have a little more attention to the babies and the children. And I had, so sometimes I would pick them up in Guam. Sometimes I'd pick up a flight with some of them in Honolulu. Well, I picked one group up in Honolulu. So amidst 20 babies and with 4 attendants helping them were all these tourists who didn't even know this war was going on. I tell you, they did not know. That war was the secret war, I think, except for a lot of commotion going on in the streets. But I got on the PA and I said, ladies and gentlemen, you might notice we have quite a number of babies here, and I would like to ask for volunteers to hold a baby for takeoff and landing. Don't worry. You won't have to hold them all. We'll find something. We'll take care of that. Oh my gosh. I finally, 5 minutes later, I had to get on the PA and say, I have to apologize. I don't have any more babies, so give you. And they didn't want to give the babies back. It was so amazing. It makes me want to cry every time I think of that, because I love these people so much. But it was, these were the things that I loved about. We had terrible passengers too, though, believe me.
So you worked for Pan Am for almost 35 years in total.
Yes, I did. I left the 36th year, yes. And the rest of the time, I was with United till 92.
What are some of your favorite uniforms? So you had several uniforms in your career at Pan Am.
Yeah, the first one was the more military, with that military-style hat. And then we had the bowler hats. And then we had a hat we could wear or not wear. And then we had, I think I liked the last one we had the best. It was the one, it was navy and had a couple stripes on it for showing that we were a flight attendant. It was the engineer had 3 and the others had it. So it was all, I enjoyed that uniform very much. I liked all of them.
What message do you have for some of the younger people that might be listening on why Pan Am history and the 34 years that you were with Pan Am was pivotal in Pan Am history? Why should it be important?
I think a job like that can never be repeated, really. That's how important it was. As I said, what other job do you keep your friends after your job is finished? What other job can you say that about? The fact that you can develop lifelong relationships, it's like an afterlife of your work life, an afterlife, and that's what it is. I feel that we had changed crews all the time. I mean, when I tell you the people we met, the people we went, and every trip, it wasn't like we had an overnight and come right back. The crew stayed in the same hotels. Everybody got to know each other. It was a briefing beginning a flight. You start a trip with a briefing. You end the trip with the captain saying, my room in 10 minutes. And he'd have beer for everybody or something. And we talk about the trip. I mean, that happened virtually every single trip. You could ask the other pilots and flight attendants if that wasn't so true. At least it was certainly true with my flights. There were people I loved. There were a few people I didn't like at all. Oh, yeah, that's what life's about. But basically, I loved these people. They were all such great quality people. It was not like another job, like in any way. You were with them on very long trips to Hong Kong when we were starting them on the 74. We would go for 18 hours to get there, and sometimes we were on duty 22 hours because of weather in Hong Kong and Canton and in Okinawa, Naha, Okinawa, to all the places that were extra places we could land if we had to wait, but everything would be blocked. But sometimes we would land in one of those places, and then there'd be no crew to replace us, so we'd be on duty for sometimes up to 22 hours. Yes, we had a little bit of rest facilities on these airplanes. But when you work like that with people, and then you go out and have dinner with them, and you have a few drinks with them, and everybody tells their stories about who they are, and so you cannot meet people like that in another way. We used to laugh a lot, though, about how different we were from the pilots, the flight attendants. We would laugh about this a bit, because I have to say the pilots were more into, well, this doesn't work like my toilet at home because this is really bad, you know. We're wanting to go to the museums, you know. They're not finding the same charm that we'd be finding, you know, in some of these places. And we joke about that a little bit but we were all very good friends in the, you know, there'd be no way to explain to people what this airline was like. No other airline had that experience. Pan Am opened airmail to other countries. It opened the Pacific and Atlantic so that people didn't have to take a ship. They were the first ones. Their whole airline was turned into Navy during World War II. I flew with those flying boat crews, the pilots and the stewards. They were all guys flying across the oceans. I think they may have had ladies flying to the Caribbean when they were doing those short flights on the flying boats. But on the long hauls, they were all guys. And they were really wonderful. When they tell me the stories of what they could do, they would get up. I mean, I think ladies could have done it, but at that time, of course, they didn't think ladies could have done anything. So that's what, I mean, not just Pan Am, but most men in general, I'll put it that way, at that time. But they would have to get up in the morning in Midway and go to the one store there, because they had to build a store for the workers there, all the workers, the people, the contractors and building. Oh my gosh, just getting that deserted unoccupied island ready was a story in itself that I heard many times. But they would go to the store, go shopping, get on the airplane, and fix the dinner for the next 8 or 9 hours to Wake Island, and then on to do the same thing on to Guam. In Honolulu, at least, they had a port steward to fix it for them. But on those islands, they had to fix the meals on board before the passengers even got on, starting to get them ready for an 8 or 9 hour flight. So they had to do what I think the most amazing things. And I got to meet them. When I work in the museum, I'm able to tell the visitors to the museum, this is the Aeronautical Museum at SFO, I'm able to tell them all the stories that these guys told me about the Goonie birds. That was their entertainment with no television, of course, and they had a day, you know, staying in there. How everybody got off the airplane, passengers and crew alike, and stayed in the hotel overnight. And then everybody got up the next day in those flying boats and continued on across the Pacific. And they had a lot of places to land. You know, they had to go to Honolulu and Wake and Guam and Manila to get to Hong Kong. That was how that one went by. I started flying 5 years after the last flying boat was finished. So I got to fly with all these people. And I love being able to tell all the wonderful stories that they told me to the visitors to our museum. So that makes my life very interesting too. You know.
Indeed. Are there any of those stories that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Just the ones of the Goonie birds. Did you ever hear that term?
I have.
What it is. It's from the albatross family. The bird family is called albatross. And what these birds did, they had nothing that they'd get in. It was like from Honolulu to Midway. Oh, first let me just tell you what Midway was. It was a desert, and I keep saying deserted. It wasn't deserted because nobody ever lived there. It was an unoccupied, no humanity there, island there, and they had a strange type of flora and fauna. And the fauna was the goonie birds, which is this, not the albatross, but a relative, let's say a very close relative of the albatross. And they sent Juan Trippe, the head of Pan Am. It was on a map. It didn't even have a name, but they finally gave it a name. And they, Juan Trippe sent a ship. I know the guy who led the expedition on a sailing, a ship over to Midway, to that island, with a bunch of carpenters and workers to build a city that they could be with a store and everything. And they built a terminal and the pier, the terminal and a hotel, because they knew the passengers and crew would all have to get off. They didn't have crews waiting for them there. No. This is because they only had 2 or 3 a week when they started, maybe 2 a week at the very beginning. This airplane, by the way, I can tell you this about the airplane. It had the flight took between, to get to Honolulu was between 21 and 23 hours in flight to get on a, it was on the, this is when they first started flying. No. Yes, on those first flying boats, on that boat, it took 21 to, I think the first flight was actually 23 hours. But it was not a problem, but it only landed on water. And they only took off and landed in daylight. They could not land that airplane at night because you couldn't see what the surf was doing at that time, what the ocean was doing. So they had to take off in the daylight and land in daylight. That's why they couldn't get across the Pacific without Midway Island. I tell people that, and they're very surprised to know that. Because Midway made it possible, because you could go from, it was about a 9-hour flight from Honolulu to Midway, and you could take off early in the morning and get there before dark. And then you could go, they'd get up, everybody would get off the airplane and go to the hotel, first in Manila, then to Wake Island, then to Guam, then to Manila. And Manila would have, of course, a port steward there to take care of the food for them, the preparation. Later on, they were able to go. The first flights, they didn't even get to Hong Kong. They'd have to take some other British airplane to Hong Kong because they didn't have the landing rights to get in there. The Brits were very tough on us. We couldn't even go to cross the Atlantic until 1939. They went to started the Pacific flying in 1935, and not till 1939, could they go across the Atlantic because the British were trying to have an airplane to compete. They worked on it, and it never worked. So they finally let Pan Am go in, and it took them a while before they ever got anything to go across.
So there is a museum on Long Island called the Pan Am Museum.
Yes.
There is a museum in Miami called History Miami. There's a museum at the San Francisco airport
Yes.
where you volunteer.
Yes.
In each of those museums, including others like the Flying Boat Museum at Foynes in Ireland, and a couple others that I may have missed. How does that make you feel that these museums are paying tribute to a part of your life, 34 years of your life, when they feature Pan Am?
I've been to all of those museums you mentioned. I still have a correspondence with Margaret O'Shaughnessy, and she's been invited to my home here. She's planning to come one of these days. She promised she would. And I loved my trip to Foynes, and I was very honored to be recognized at the one in New York. I've visited the one in Miami Springs. I think that's where it is, isn't it, in Miami Springs or where? Miami. And I love my job at SFO Aeronautical Museum. I feel that the company, I think this company should be recognized in some way. I mean, I was so sorry to see it fold up. That was very disappointing in my life, a big disappointment. Because it shouldn't have happened. But, things happen. There are many reasons for things like that to happen. There are many reasons. And a lot of it was the terrorism that was going on, of course, at the time. And some of it was maybe some business decisions that were not so smart.
Anything else you'd like to add about your experiences with Pan Am?
No, I think I've talked too much maybe, but...
Oh, no, this is great. I thank you very much for your time. Well, Barbara, it is a pleasure talking with you, and I want to thank you for your time today on the Pan Am podcast.
Well, it was my pleasure to talk to you, and I hope you've got the information that you were looking for.
Very much. So thank you very much, and hope to meet you soon.
You're welcome, and I'll look forward to that.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Pan Am was a pioneer in air travel and still stands as one of the most iconic and innovative airlines in aviation history. That legacy lives on at the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York, where you can explore the rich history of the aircrafts and individuals at the heart of the company known as the world's most experienced airline. For more information about the Pan Am Museum, check out our website at www.thepanammuseum.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. As was once a tagline in one of our commercials, we would greatly appreciate your support to help the Pan Am Museum continue making the going great. You can also support the museum by shopping on our online store for all things Pan Am, accessories, apparel, jewelry, books, models, and posters. We want to hear from you. If you have a question for us or want to share your story, our email address is podcast@thepanammuseum.org. As flight crews once said to passengers departing for their destinations around the world, thank you for flying, Pan Am.